The dirty little virus. Well, I was moved to write a direct lyric, not something too emotional or deep.
Iggy Pop stood center stage, shirtless, body covered in slashes, hair slick with sweat, eyes unblinking. The guitars howled, the drums pounded like hammers, and he was biting the microphone as if it were the last living thing on earth. No stage gimmicks, no dazzling lights, just a man screaming until he bled, not to be loved, but to prove he was still alive. Who turns pain into an artistic manifesto? Who dares to use blood, sweat, and screams to speak what society always tries to silence? Born in the smallest trailer home on the block in Michigan, James Newell Osterberg Jr., later known as Iggy Pop, never followed the traditional path of stardom. He wasn't handsome, didn't cater to the public, didn't promise anything easy on the ears. He took the stage not to perform, but to tear apart every mask the world forces people to wear. Iggy Pop is not simply a singer. He is an instinctive convulsion in an age of calculation, a primal scream in a polished industry. A man who, when you think he's gone, suddenly reappears, alive, screaming, blood dripping down his bare chest, and laughing. He was not born to fit into this world, but somehow, the world had to learn to accept him. And if punk is a voice for the outcasts, then that voice, from the very beginning until now, still bears the name Iggy Pop. Are you ready to walk through the life of a man who never asked to be loved but made himself a storm the world could not ignore? Early life. Before becoming Iggy Pop, the man howling like a wild beast on stage, he was simply James Newell Osterberg Jr., born on April 21st, 1947, in Muskegon, Michigan, USA. He grew up in Ypsilanti, in the smallest trailer on the block. No grand piano, no cozy private room, just an old, cramped trailer where 3 people lived, ate, slept, dreamed, and tried not to freeze in the winter. His father, James Newell Osterberg Sr., was a former Marine who had served in World War II and later became a high school English teacher and baseball coach. A strict, principled man, but utterly devoted. His mother, Luella Christensen Osterberg, was a Danish-American who worked as a secretary at a medical office. Gentle, steadfast, and the quiet anchor of the family. They weren't wealthy, but they did something few parents of that era would dare. They gave up the only private space in the trailer, the bedroom, so their son could play drums. Every night, his parents slept on the sofa, while James immersed himself in drumming, sometimes until 2 or 3 a.m. Not a single complaint. They gave me the whole world, just by letting me bang on drums in their living room. Iggy Pop, American Masters documentary. James wasn't like the other kids. He wasn't athletic, didn't stand out at school, and wasn't chased by girls. But he had something most kids didn't, an uncanny sensitivity to sound. While others idolized Elvis Presley, James sank deep into Bo Diddley, John Lee Hooker, Miles Davis, black artists often overlooked at the time. He learned to mimic rhythms using anything in the house, spoons, bottles, window frames. He wasn't just playing music. He was setting himself free through rhythm. At school, he was called weird, but it didn't bother him. The more the world ignored him, the more he wanted to become something no one could look away from. He began playing drums in his first band, the Iguanas, and from there, the name Iggy was born. No one knew that in that tiny trailer, one of punk rock's loudest voices was slowly taking shape. Not from rebellion, but from loneliness, silence, and a desperate need to be heard. Early career. Iggy Pop's first band, the Iguanas, only got him gigs at school parties. His second band, the Prime Movers, made him wear a suit and play proper polished blues. But James Osterberg Jr. wanted more. He wanted the drums to scream, the guitars to burn like fire, and the vocals to tear into the listener's mind. In 1967, he stepped away from the drums, grabbed a microphone, and formed the Stooges in Ann Arbor, Michigan, alongside brothers Ron and Scott Ashton and Dave Alexander. The name Stooges was inspired by the comedy group The Three Stooges, but their music was anything but funny. It was acid-laced garage rock, deliberate chaos, a slap in the face to the polished music dominating the radio waves at the time. Their debut album, The Stooges, 1969, produced by John Cale of the Velvet Underground, was not warmly received. Critics dismissed it as rough and unskilled, and audiences couldn't understand why a band would sing "I Wanna Be Your Dog" with screeching feedback that sounded like the speakers were melting down. But they didn't realize punk rock had just begun, and Iggy Pop was its first scream. On stage, Iggy didn't sing in the traditional sense. He screamed, hissed, crawled, bled, climbed speakers and jumped into the crowd, poured candle wax on his chest, tore his own skin. One time he chewed on broken glass in front of the audience. Another, he lay motionless for an entire song, then suddenly sprang up, laughing maniacally. I wanted to make the audience unable to sit still. If they felt disgusted, I'd succeeded. Iggy Pop, interview, 1970. Funhouse, 1970, and Raw Power, 1973, pushed musical boundaries even further. Saxophones shrieked like dying animals, bass lines rattled the ribcage, and Iggy's voice sounded like someone clawing their way out of hell. But instead of exploding into fame, the Stooges sank into addiction, chaos, and disillusionment. The label dropped them. No station played their music. No one realized that in failure, they had become legend. In 1974, the Stooges broke up. Iggy, by then deeply addicted to heroin, had no band, no home, no reason to live. And yet, even off stage, his scream echoed in the minds of thousands of young people, those searching for something raw, unfiltered, real. And somewhere far off, in London, New York, Berlin, punk rock was waiting for his return. Career breakthrough. In 1974, after the Stooges collapsed in a haze of drugs, Iggy Pop vanished from the stage lights like a shattered soul. No band, no record deal, no home, just a gaunt body dragging itself through Los Angeles, surviving on friends' couches, drifting through endless nights. Addiction had devoured everything that was left of him, and when there was nowhere left to go, he checked himself into UCLA's psychiatric hospital as a form of surrender. Just when it seemed like everything had ended, a hand reached out. It was none other than David Bowie. They had known each other before, shared performances, conversations, moments like two misfits in the world of artists. But this time, Bowie didn't just visit. He pulled Iggy out of the hospital, brought him on tour, fed him, sheltered him, and eventually invited him to move to Berlin, a divided, bleak city stripped of glamour, paparazzi, or spectacle, a place where two broken men could begin again. In a worn apartment overlooking the Berlin Wall, Iggy Pop began to rewrite himself. No more heroin whispering in his veins, no cheering crowd, only the sound of typewriter keys, deep guitar riffs, and Bowie's silhouette at the piano. In the biting cold of winter, they worked tirelessly, and the result was The Idiot. The music was cold, mechanical, distant, just like Berlin in its post-war silence. But in every lyric, every fragmented beat, there was a soul slowly being reborn. Less than a year later, with life pulsing back through his veins, Iggy Pop took another step with Lust for Life. It was no longer an echo from the abyss. It was the roaring cry of a survivor, charging toward freedom like a starving man diving into light. The title track became a personal manifesto, ferocious, sarcastic, defiant, but hungrier than anything he'd ever written. To be reborn in art was also to be reborn on stage. Iggy returned to performing, still shirtless, still screaming, but now with eyes wide open. He was no longer the Iggy Pop slowly self-destructing, but a warrior rising from the wreckage, daring to live, and daring to live truthfully. David Bowie didn't just bring him back to music. He saved a man's life. And from Berlin onward, Iggy Pop was no longer the former rocker of a failed band. He became a slow-burning fire that blazed through the next 4 decades. A survivor fueled by the very punk he helped create. Instinctive, fierce, and unwilling to bow to any definition of success. Scandals and turmoil. Iggy Pop never set out to be a model artist. From the very first time he stepped on stage, he flatly rejected every mold, both in music and in life. And because of that, his scandals, downfalls, and missteps didn't come as shocks, but as inseparable parts of who he was. Iggy never tried to hide anything. He laid it all bare, painful, chaotic, raw, just like the way he sang, screamed, and carved blood from his bare chest. The darkest and most persistent of his battles was with drugs. After the Stooges broke up, heroin became his only remaining companion. No home, no band, no hope. Iggy drifted through Los Angeles like a living corpse. He slept on park benches, begged for food, and eventually checked himself into a psychiatric hospital because there was nowhere else left to go. Many people would have died in those conditions, but he didn't. He survived, at the cost of nearly all dignity, health, and self-respect. Even after the fragile recovery in Berlin, the years that followed were no less turbulent. He plunged into rampant sex as if his body were the only thing left that reminded him he existed. He once claimed to have slept with hundreds, men, women, strangers, fans, regardless of age or situation. But some stains aren't easy to wash away. In a 1990s interview, he admitted to having had a sexual relationship with a 13-year-old girl in New York. Though it occurred before current federal laws were enacted, the confession drew heavy backlash. Old media outlets scrambled to remove the story, while the public remained divided, some outraged, others forgiving. It wasn't just his private life. His performances themselves often teetered on the edge of danger. Iggy Pop didn't perform, he self-immolated. In the 1970s, he was the first artist to introduce stage diving into performance culture, but he didn't stop there. He slashed his own body, poured candle wax on his chest, chewed broken glass, crawled like an animal, smashed his head against speakers. At one show, he even invited the audience on stage to beat him, and they did. After that Detroit performance, he was carried backstage bloodied and nearly unconscious. I don't need the audience to love me. I need them to see that I'm in pain, and that I still get back up. Iggy Pop, interview, 1977. In his personal life, he was married twice, but both ended quickly. He admitted he wasn't good at commitment, didn't understand stability. Love to him often felt like just another way to run from himself. It wasn't until 2008 that he finally found something close to peace with a woman named Nina Alu, and they've been together ever since. Behind the legend, behind the screams, behind every collapse and act of self-destruction stands a man who always got back up, not because he was forgiven, but because he never asked to be. To Iggy Pop, life isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about turning every one of them into an indelible part of the truth. Personal life. Throughout his years of rampaging across stages, Iggy Pop was the image of someone who didn't care, unafraid of being hated, indifferent to being loved. But off stage, when the guitars fell silent and the blood on his bare chest had dried, he was a man who craved connection more than anyone else, and spent nearly his entire life not knowing how to hold on to it. His parents loved him with quiet sacrifice, but they didn't hug their son, didn't speak sweet words. Iggy grew up in a disciplined home, void of affectionate expression, and that left an invisible scar. He never learned how to emotionally attach to anyone for too long. His first marriage, to young model Wendy Weiss, began like many artist romances, intense, instinctive, and then implosive. When Wendy needed stability, Iggy drowned in drugs, blood-soaked performances, hookups with fans backstage, and days of disappearance. That marriage ended quietly. No reunion, not even a phone call after the split. His second marriage, to Japanese visual artist Tsuchi Asano, was a different kind of turning point. Tsuchi understood art, accepted the madness in him, but couldn't endure the waves of panic and depression. Iggy would vanish for days, locking himself in hotel rooms with nothing but cigarettes, coffee, and paper. Endless tours, sleepless nights, and the silence of a chaotic mind eventually tore apart what even artistic love couldn't salvage. Between the mid-1980s and 1990s, he spiraled through sex, addiction, and emptiness. He slept with hundreds, men, women, in scenarios he couldn't even remember. Iggy once recalled waking up next to 3 strangers, none of whom were conscious. For him, physical intimacy wasn't pleasure. It was a way to cover the feeling of never being truly needed. But then in 2008, at the age of 61, something strange happened. He fell in love and learned to be still. The woman's name was Nina Alu, not from the art world, not impressed by fame, not drawn to the spotlight. They met at a small party in Florida, and Nina, then working in aviation, looked at him not as a rock legend, but as a lost man who needed to be heard. Iggy once said, "Nina was the first person who didn't let me perform. She wasn't afraid of me, didn't idolize me, and because of that, I had to be myself." They married quietly. No press, no big celebration. They adopted cats, lived in Florida, took morning walks, cooked in the afternoons. Nina looked after him when his joints ached, when he couldn't sleep, or simply when the weather made him moody. And he, the man who once rebelled against the world, learned to sit still for hours just to hear his wife talk about a delayed flight. At an age when many rock stars had died or disappeared, Iggy Pop was still creating, still singing, still shirtless on stage. But when he came home, he was a husband, a cat lover, and for the first time in his life, a man who knew where he belonged. That peace wasn't an ending. It was a reward he earned, not through fame, but by surviving year after year without giving in. Legacy and influence. Iggy Pop was never a chart topper. He didn't sell tens of millions of records, didn't headline multi-million-dollar stadium tours, and was rarely, if ever, played on mainstream radio. But in the world of rock, few are more revered. Because he didn't just shape a genre. He defined an attitude toward life. When the Stooges debuted in the late 1960s, the world wasn't ready for them. While rock was still dreaming in flower power and psychedelic vibes, Iggy Pop screamed with a raspy voice, rolled across the stage like a creature torn from the earth, and forced audiences to face a brutal truth. Music wasn't meant to soothe, but to shake. With heavy riffs, raw lyrics, and merciless rhythms, he laid the foundation for punk rock, before it even had a name. In the 1970s, when the Sex Pistols exploded in the UK and the Ramones in New York, they openly admitted, without Iggy, there would be no them. Iggy Pop is the godfather of punk, not because he claimed the title, but because every rebellious scream in punk carries his mark. Iggy's influence stretches far beyond punk. From Kurt Cobain to Jack White, from Nick Cave to Trent Reznor, from the Red Hot Chili Peppers to Queens of the Stone Age, all bear traces of Iggy Pop's legacy, a calculated recklessness, an artful chaos, a fearless voice in an increasingly artificial world. He's not just a stage icon, he's an enduring source of creative inspiration. Even past 70, he continues to release new albums, collaborating with younger generations like Josh Homme, Duff McKagan, Travis Barker. No one calls him an old artist, because Iggy Pop has never been outdated. He doesn't live in the past. He's always one beat ahead of the present. The major accolades eventually arrived. In 2010, the Stooges were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, after nearly 4 decades of being underrated. In 2020, Iggy Pop received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, standing on stage with a quiet smile. No screaming, no blood. In 2022, he was honored with the Polar Music Prize, Sweden's most prestigious music award, accompanied by praise for his fearlessness that changed culture. But perhaps his greatest honor isn't found in gold statues or red carpets. It lies in something simpler. Even as punk fades from the spotlight, the name Iggy Pop lives on and burns brighter than ever. Young artists still look to him as a compass, as a symbol of untamed freedom. I never wanted to be a hero. I just wanted to be real and scream what others are afraid to say. Iggy Pop. And in a world growing ever more artificial, that scream still rings out, reminding us that art doesn't need to be perfect, only honest enough that no one can look away. Present day, at 77, while most rock legends have chosen silence or left the stage for good, Iggy Pop still sings. And he sings as if the blood in his veins has never slowed. But if in the past he performed to survive, today he performs to live truthfully. No longer the man who runs into fire, but still the one who keeps the flame. In 2024, he surprised everyone by collaborating with goth rock icon Susie Sue to re-record The Passenger for a Magnum ice cream campaign. The new version was slower, deeper, soaked in nostalgia. An old hit reborn, and it felt like he was too. Soon after, Iggy stepped back on stage for the Lust for Life tour, a European tour marking over 45 years since the iconic Lust for Life album. In cities like Paris, London, and Hamburg, audiences witnessed an Iggy Pop still shirtless, still screaming, but with eyes softened, as if a man who had walked through every storm now turned back and smiled at his younger self. By 2025, he showed no signs of slowing. During a sold-out show at London's Alexandra Palace, Iggy ended his set with a jaw-dropping exit. He climbed into a coffin, and his crew carried him off stage amid stunned applause and laughter. A farewell? A final joke? Or a message, if this is the end, let it be truly punk? But no, he wasn't done yet. In June and July 2025, Iggy Pop continued his European tour, playing everywhere from Worcester, Belgium, Berlin, and Cologne to Mallorca Live Festival, Spain, where he shared the stage with Massive Attack, Bad Gayal, and Suede. Each time he appeared, young crowds were left in awe. That old man is still wild, and still more real than all of us. Between tour dates, he still found time for his BBC Six music radio show, Iggy Confidential, where he shared favorite tracks, life stories, and took listeners back to raw, unfiltered sounds untouched by algorithm. There, Iggy spoke in a low, slow voice, sometimes as soft as poetry, like he was writing a letter to an old friend on a sleepless night. Off stage, he lives peacefully with his wife Nina Alu in a small home in Florida, filled with cats, sunshine, and mornings without paparazzi. He reads philosophy, tends to plants, and turns down every reality TV invitation, saying plainly, "I don't want to be a celebrity. I just want to be someone who still finds music necessary." Even when he agreed to be the face of Dom Perignon's campaign, "Creation is an eternal journey," he was still unmistakably Iggy, not wearing a crown, not dressed in tuxedo, just standing in a dark room, speaking about creativity like a sacred belief. Iggy Pop is aging, there's no denying that. His hair is thinner, his frame more wiry, but he's aging on his own terms, unbent, unfiltered, and still leaving echoes in the air whenever he opens his mouth. And the strange thing is, the older he gets, the closer he seems to the public, not through charm, but through a kind of raw honesty the modern world is starving for. There are artists who were born to be loved, and then there are others, like Iggy Pop, who were born to make the world unable to look away. He didn't walk through the front door of music. He tore down the wall. He didn't sing to please, didn't write to be easy on the ears, didn't live to decorate a biography. Iggy Pop exists as a primal scream of instinct, of loneliness, of the hunger to be heard, without needing to be beautiful or correct. Across 6 decades, he has lived through it all: fame, failure, addiction, solitude, resurrection, and farewells. But what sets him apart isn't just that he survived, it's how he survived, through blood, through screams, and through truth. As the world grows more polished, as artists grow more alike, Iggy Pop, well into his 70s, remains the last man standing who refuses to be packaged. And every time he picks up a microphone, even just to say one simple line, you know, it's not a performance, it's a declaration. If punk is a genre, then Iggy Pop wrote its first definition. If punk is an attitude, then he's the one who dared to live it out loud. And if punk were a person, rebellious, wounded, wild, but honest to the core, that person could only be Iggy Pop. Did you ever hear Iggy Pop when you were young and think he was insane? Or have you just discovered him recently and seen something of yourself in that scream? Tell us how Iggy Pop has made you feel. And if you've ever seen him live, was it a moment that can never be repeated? Don't forget to leave a comment. Share your thoughts. Because punk, after all, isn't something you just watch. It's something you feel.